I think that's pretty much ready to go at this point. So I want to thank everyone for arriving today for this. I'm not even sure what number of session this is, but it's been quite a few. But today we're going to be having a presentation from Melissa Seelye, Sara, Clarke, and Marni Harrington on reimagining scholarly communication through experiential learning, merging theory, practice for MLIS students. I believe this is on the ELIP journal. I've had the pleasure of interviewing many of these people on this project before, and it has been fascinating project. They'll speak for 20 to 25 minutes, after which the remaining time will be dedicated towards questions. So I want to just invite one of you to start speaking.
That will be me. Thanks, Melissa. You got those slides going? Awesome. Okay, so good afternoon, and thanks for spending some time with us today. And thank you to the moderators, Alex, etc., and all the volunteers who have been hosting the virtual conference this year. I'm sure it's been a great deal of work, so thanks for that. First, a bit more about us to provide context about our involvement with MLIS students and experiential learning. I'm Marni Harrington, Director of the FIMS Graduate Library at Western University, supporting among others grad students in our MLIS program. I'm also one of the primary advisors for the journal Emerging Library and Information Perspectives, or ELIP, as we'll refer to it throughout our presentation. Our library publishes ELIP. I'm here with Sara Clarke, an MLIS student at Western University, currently on an 8-month co-op, also known as an internship placement, at Western Libraries. She's working in user experience and student engagement. Sara is also the 2019-2020 managing editor of ELIP. And finally, Melissa Seelye is a scholarly communication coordinator at San Francisco State University. As an MLIS student, Melissa laid the groundwork for ELIP and continues to be one of our primary advisors. Melissa is also the creator and instructor of the MLIS course, Scholarly Communication and Open Access Publishing, taught online at Western. It's the only course within ALA accreditation purview that is integrated with an active journal. So I'll begin with an introduction to ELIP. However, it's hard to talk about the journal without the ScholComm course, so I'll touch on that a little bit as well. Then Sara, as managing editor, brings the human element to academic publishing. And finally, Melissa will focus on her ScholComm course in relation to experiential learning and integrating theory and practice. So over the last 10 years, there have been ongoing discussions in our faculty and library about access to MLIS student work above and beyond posting student projects and essays to the library website. In the library, we wanted to promote readership of this work and create a targeted audience. At the same time, discussions also focused around adding a curricular element by introducing a new course to go beyond a mere introduction of scholarly communication and open access in one-off lectures in existing courses. These were important discussions to have because our students are responsive to what's going on in the world. They offer unique reflections and critical analyses about what they're learning in their courses. And their scholarship adds a new perspective, a new and important perspective to current thinking in LIS. So these influences all led to ELIP, launched in 2018. It's a fully open access peer-reviewed journal managed by students and published annually. Submissions are accepted right now only from MLIS students and recent grads, and it's a platform for a broad range of work, including audio, video, and images. There are 5 categories for submissions to ELIP. The first, article-length submissions, include research articles or critical essays identifying research questions or statements of purpose. These are peer-reviewed. The other 4 submission categories are not peer-reviewed. Instead, they are reviewed by the editorial advisors and may be used as sample content in the scholarly communication course as an introduction to peer review. In the field, submissions often include a summary or reflection, for example, experiences about co-op, conference presentations, or volunteer work. For the field, submissions are targeted to LIS practitioners, often stemming from applied coursework or projects. The example provided is a group project that evolved into a hands-on workshop called Sexual Violence Awareness in the Library Workplace. The submission includes multimodal elements, an audio file with an with an accompanying transcript and PowerPoint slides based on the workshop. There are also MLIS student-conducted interviews. These could be with practitioners, activists, or faculty. And finally, there is a review category where we encourage students to look beyond traditional types of content, reviewing databases, games, and software, for example. Text from our aims and scope page stresses the importance of fostering a publishing community. We visualize this publishing community beyond enrolling for credit learning, like in Melissa's class, but by engaging in the journal publication process in a variety of ways. For example, there is a paid managing editor position that works out of the library. Of course, there's the role for authors to submit to any of one of the 5 categories that I mentioned previously. Then those who are enrolled in the scholarly communication class participate in a peer review assignment, which Melissa will talk about in depth. And a call is put out for production assistants to work on a volunteer basis with the managing editor to copy, edit, and fact check citations. So this image, we're gonna go through a little bit. It depicts the elements and flow of student engagement that's so important to us. The timeline begins at the top left with hiring the managing editor and ends in the bottom right when the issue is published. The orange arrows signify the managing editor's liaison role between different stakeholders, and the check marks signify advisor oversight. We have a variety of advisors who are chosen for a particular submission based on their expertise. For example, archivists, public library workers, copyright scholars, and more. Starting with the managing editor, who is responsible for outreach and mentoring, we work with authors first. Authors submit their work and it is reviewed by the advisors before moving on to peer review. We ensure the work meets the minimal guidelines for the journal and the intended submission category. After peer review, advisors again check and amalgamate the reviews before the work is returned to authors. Authors review the feedback and revise as necessary. Once again, the editorial advisors check for accuracy of revisions before moving the submission along to line level proofreading and fact checking. Again, authors review and revise as necessary. Then there's the final review of the submission by the editorial advisors before the managing editor prepares and publishes the issue. So that's a very quick overview of the practical side of ELIP. And I'm going to turn it over to Sara Clarke, our current managing editor, and she's going to discuss the humanizing side of publishing.
Thanks, Marni. So the importance of discussing the human element of scholarly communication became clear to me in the fall of last year, as I began talking to students about the journal and learned that there was a number of barriers and negative feelings holding students back from submitting their work. Feelings of imposter syndrome and the anxiety and vulnerability associated with putting yourself out there through publishing are often felt intensely by the students that ELIP works with and who generally have not had experience with publishing. As Grace Farrell has noted, although MLIS students often have rich work experience in LIS and adjacent fields or strong academic backgrounds, it is not uncommon for them to feel unready or ill-prepared to enter their voices into the field's scholarly conversation. Additionally, as Charlotte Rowe has pointed out, the current and historic lack of diversity within scholarly publishing can be discouraging to underrepresented students. In general, I found that it was not uncommon for students to hold preconceived and limiting notions about what constitutes legitimate scholarship in terms of what it should look like, what it should be about, and who is entitled to do it. So after acknowledging these barriers and realizing how charged scholarly publishing can be for students, the question that I think ELIP was designed to answer and which I thought a lot about this year is, how can we refocus the publishing process to make it more inviting and empowering for our student authors? The rest of this section will highlight some of the ways that ELIP makes publishing more achievable, enjoyable, and welcoming for students. So initially, I incorrectly assumed that editing would be the most important part of my role with ELIP, but I quickly learned that cultivating relationships with the authors and earning their trust is equally important. There are several ways in which ELIP fosters a publishing community that and thereby creates an infrastructure of support for its authors. The physical grounding of ELIP in the FIMS graduate library, at least in non-pandemic times, plays an important role in gathering ELIP's community and making publishing into a social activity, rather than one that authors have to face on their own. By holding drop-in hours and workshops in the library and having the managing editor make visits to and send promotional materials to the MLIS classes, the journal is integrated into student life. For instance, the photo on this slide is of a workshop that was held in the fall to demystify the publishing process for authors and to bring together various people involved in the process. There were many, many people involved in the journal this year, and opportunities to collaborate were provided to all who were interested in getting involved. So by making publishing a visible and transparent community effort, the mystery of the publishing process is removed and students are not held back by the fear of the unknown. The roles of kindness and empathy within LIS are increasingly being examined, and these issues certainly do not fall outside of the realm of scholarly communication. Recently, Daly and Yeager have written on the importance of the human aspect of peer review and have discussed, quote, peer review as a space for relationship and community building. This prioritizing of kindness and empathy is something that we have intentionally tried to weave into ELIPS's processes and the training that we provide to peer reviewers and production assistants. Going through peer review is probably the most intimidating part of the publishing process. So we created guidelines for the peer reviewers that emphasize the importance of creating kind and balanced reviews that incorporate empathetic criticism and which aim to uncover and develop the submission's strengths rather than outline their weaknesses. In a tips for peer review handout that was provided to the peer reviewers, the process for engaging in empathetic criticism was broken down, and students were encouraged to make their feedback specific, actionable, and balanced, and to take the time to fully understand and engage with the work in order to help it reach its full potential. Similarly, we have found that it is important to be flexible in our submission guidelines and to work with authors to determine the best pathways for their work. Therefore, rather than rejecting submissions that do not initially fit within the outlined submission categories or which are not fully developed, we work with authors to figure out the next steps for their work. In the forthcoming volume, 2 submissions that were initially submitted didn't clearly fit into any of the submission categories. However, through discussion about possible directions they could take and collaboration between the authors and editorial advisors, the authors decided to revise them into rich toolkits full of resources and information for LIS practitioners. ELIP's identity as an open access journal is directly tied to its inclusive and flexible approach to publishing. And I have found that open access publishing is inherently more relatable and meaningful to students than is traditional closed publishing models. The image included in this slide is of an open access display that was created in the library for Open Access Week last year. The display made visible ELIP's open access status and its connection to the larger open movement. Beyond making its content freely accessible, ELIP integrates an open philosophy into its processes and approach to publishing. For example, in our calls for submissions, we actively solicit creative approaches and diverse perspectives in LIS. Additionally, in accepting a wide range of content types and multimodal formats, the journal seeks to make room for voices and modes of scholarship that may not easily fit into more traditional publishing formats. So finally, ELIP's emphasis on the publishing process is another way that the journal is responsive to the needs of MLIS students. By breaking down the process into manageable chunks and providing authors with ongoing feedback and mentorship opportunities, this year we ended up with a very high number of submissions and authors who really embraced the process and ended up transforming their initial submissions, which were in some cases work they had completed for courses, into very strong publications. Several authors took the opportunity to work closely with editorial advisors who had specialized expertise in their topic areas and who guided them through what can be a very overwhelming revision process. For some authors, having this additional support was the crucial factor in their decision to pursue their submissions at all. It is also interesting to note that now that ELIP has gone through a few publishing cycles, there has been a pattern of students participating in the process in different ways, and in some cases becoming mentors themselves in subsequent publishing cycles. So now Melissa will talk in more depth about experiential learning in the context of ELIP and the Scholarly Communication and Open Access course.
Thanks, Sara. So like Sara said, I will be focusing on how ELIP is integrated into experiential learning activities in an MLIS course. The word cloud on this slide is derived from the descriptions for the 2 peer review assignments in the course, through which students put theoretical insights gained into practice. As Carpenter et al. Wrote in their 2011 article on the future role of academic libraries in scholarly communication, one library director spoke to the need for library and information science curriculum to prepare students to engage in this work. Rather than just providing MLIS students with a publishing venue, as Marni mentioned, ELIP was also envisioned to provide additional opportunities for hands-on engagement and structured learning activities. This is particularly important given the increasingly complex nature of the scholarly communication ecosystem, which requires not just a theoretical understanding of publication cycles, but also applied knowledge of various tools and platforms. In launching ELIP, we considered various ways to provide curricular integrated learning opportunities. Ultimately, we decided to focus on the peer review process, both because of the need for training peer reviewers and the potential for cyclical experiential learning. I worked with Marni to design the Scholarly Communication and Open Access Publishing course, which blends concrete peer review experiences with abstract conceptualization, as well as ongoing reflection and experimentation. The course is fully online, as Marni mentioned, with a maximum capacity of 25 students. It is grounded in the learning outcomes shown on this slide, which likewise include both theoretical knowledge and practical skills intended to prepare students to engage in scholarly communication practices in a variety of ways. Students' applied experience in peer review and quality control in particular give them an appreciation for the work involved in publishing a journal, and many come to question why commercial publishers rarely compensate scholars for this work. Now I want to focus on how the experiential learning activities related to ELIP are executed. The first concrete experience is a practice peer review of a shorter submission, such as an in or for the field reflection, a review, or an interview. Informed by the kind peer review guidelines that Sara described, as well as section-specific evaluation questions, this assignment is a relatively low-stakes opportunity for students to practice providing constructive feedback. While their feedback is not shared directly with authors, I do summarize the feedback and share it with other advisors. From there, students complete the Week 2 learning module on peer review, which encompasses historical background information, peer review best practices, and an assigned article with accompanying open peer review reports. Students then reflect on the lesson and the effectiveness of the open peer review reports through participating in the forum or a synchronous discussion session. By week 3, students are assigned an article length submission and groups for their more formal peer review report assignment, and their practice peer review is also due. I grade and return feedback on their practice peer review with a particular focus on suggestions for improving the nature of their feedback prior to the week 5 due date for the peer review report assignment. For both assignments, the managing editor and I emphasize the double-blind nature of ELIP's peer review process, and I regularly remind the class not to discuss their assigned submissions beyond their groups. The peer review report assignment is more complex, so I will summarize the various steps here. I need to deal with the situation. I'm sorry, there's someone at my door. This is very embarrassing. Just give me one moment.
Such is the nature of live online presentations. While that's going on, do the other presenters want to just chat for a moment about the project, or we'll just wait, I suppose? Okay, we're back.
My neighbor called about a hot water issue. It was not me, and maintenance was knocking. Sorry about that.
Not a problem.
Okay, so I believe I'm on the next slide. Let me just go through. Okay. Nope. Let's go back. Okay, so the peer review report assignment is more complex, so I will summarize the various steps here. First, each student reads their assigned article length submission to get a sense of the content. Next, those students assigned to the same submission work as a group to distribute relevant sources and create an annotated bibliography to help each student grasp how the submission relates to the broader literature. Each student then does a closer reading of their assigned submission, focusing in particular on how it relates to and compares with the sources included in their group's annotated bibliography. From there, the group engages in a discussion to share impressions of the article and talk through questions. Although previous students have expressed some initial misgivings about this part of the assignment, most are first-time peer reviewers and ultimately reflect that it was helpful to hear from one another and get a sense of how their impressions compared to those of their peers. Lastly, each student writes an individual peer review report and submits a publication recommendation via ELIP's OJS platform. Once the peer review feedback is shared with authors and revisions are completed, submissions then go to one of two stages. If the revisions were major and/or did not address the key recommendations, I may solicit volunteers from the course to conduct a second round of peer review, or editorial team advisors may step in at this stage. If the revisions were relatively minor in scope and addressed the key recommendations, the articles proceed to the quality control stage. Students in the class engage in fact and citation checking, as well as APA formatting, and volunteer production assistants also contribute to this work. Re-engaging with submissions at the production stage gives students in the class another opportunity to reflect on the peer review process, as they see what recommendations authors did and did not address. The quality control processes also help students in the class to look at the submissions through a different lens, while gaining further appreciation for the work involved producing quality scholarship. As we prepare to issue ELIP's fourth annual call for papers, we have several goals in mind for the 2020-2021 cycle. First, as Sara explained, the pandemic has forced ELIP to rely on virtual means of fostering a publishing community of practice. Whereas we had the benefit of building on in-person relationships during the last publication cycle, this year, we will be beginning with virtual outreach. We hope to be able to draw on some of the strategies I have developed teaching the associated online course. We also hope to continue encouraging diverse forms of scholarship, as well as submissions from underrepresented authors. One strategy for accomplishing this will be targeting outreach to particular courses that emphasize critical approaches to the field of library and information science. Another strategy that we will pursue as a means of fostering a more inclusive publishing experience will be rethinking our language and editing practices. We have a relatively traditional style guide at this point and provide copy editing in addition to the aforementioned quality control processes. Some authors appreciate this, but it can be overwhelming, and we will strive to reach a balance. So with that, hopefully we still have some time for questions. Sorry again about the interruption.
Not a problem. Does anyone want to start off with a question? If not, it's going to come from me, and none of us want that. All right, very well then. So the sorts of questions that usually come to my mind are the meta level questions of how you see this impacting the field of like open access publishing generally. Like, are we finally going to be able to kill Elsevier? Will this be the stake to the heart of the corporations? So like, if any of you want to speak on what you hope the long-term impact might be.
Well, I like that question. I'm always happy to speak to that question, Alex, so thank you. I mean, I think that in order to actually counter the commercial publishing behemoths, we have to start empowering our students, faculty, researchers to engage in community-owned alternatives. And I think on a lot of campuses, that is coming from the library, that push. And so to engage our MLIS students who go into academic library settings in that process, I think they really have to have a sense of just what it takes to create a sustainable publishing venue. And it's not just a matter of launching a platform, which I think is what many library administrators think in particular. It takes so much more than that. And I think MLIS students gaining an appreciation for the amount of work involved will put them in a much better stead to advocate for the resources necessary to push back against the Elsevier's of the world.
Excellent. We just have a link in chat. Let's see here. Oh, we got a first question. A couple of similar questions, if there's time. One, what has surprised you most about launching and developing this program? And two, what do you wish you had known or done differently when you started this program? There's also a hand up afterwards.
Marni, do you want to take either of those?
Yeah, why don't I start? And I'll just maybe speak to quickly what has surprised us, I think, is the we've had a lot of interest. Students are interested, our faculty are interested in getting their student publications in there. So although it's a lot of work on the part of the managing editor part, their role, we certainly have uptake from our faculty and students, which is awesome. And I think that's going to carry us. We're going to keep going. I mean, we're certainly solidified in the faculty now as part of the MLIS program, and that'll keep it going. How about the second one, Melissa?
I think a lesson that we learned very early on was that I tried to incorporate copy editing into the course, and copy editing is just always the problem. It takes so much work, and people need to be well trained in it. And what we found was that it just didn't work that well for the course. It's worked a lot better to rely on volunteers who express interest, who are skilled in copy editing, and then we can provide more targeted training to those volunteers, which is why the course now focuses on other quality control checks like fact checking, citation checking, and APA formatting. I think that was the kind of the biggest lesson learned. Moving forward, just the need for mentoring authors and dealing with the need for second rounds of peer review, because that also can't be worked into the course formally because not all submissions will need it.
Excellent. I believe Philip Doughty has the floor now. I'm just going to stop the screen share. Hi,
I've been watching ELIP from afar. I'm on the faculty in University of Texas at Austin, so I congratulate you on an excellent publication. I haven't gotten any of our students yet, to my knowledge, to submit, but I love twisting arms. But my question is with regard to peer review. You talked some about the affective barriers for authors. Well, we know peer reviewing can be as anxiety provoking and complicated as writing. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about how do you help students overcome those barriers, especially to combine a rigor of a good actionable review with empathy and an engaged review rather than dismissive or overly full of praise.
Thank you for that question, Philip. And I'm so happy that you've heard about us in Texas. I should note that we're only accepting submissions from MLIS students at Western at this point, but we're certainly always thinking about areas for collaboration. In terms of the affective dimension of peer review, the assignments in the course have evolved over time to address that. So the practice peer review activity is one of those things that kind of came into being in a more official capacity to give students that low stakes way to provide feedback. You know, I stayed up front, your feedback is not going to be shared with the authors directly, it's just coming to me, and then I'm going to give you feedback on your feedback, and that's going to help you for your more formal peer review report assignment of an article length submission. The other piece of this is that I've found two things to be really important. One, showing students open peer review reports. I think open peer reviewer reports are the best learning tool for teaching open peer review, or for teaching peer review best practices. So the reading for the peer review module is an article with its associated peer review reports. They read the article, they read the peer review reports, then they reflect on the article again. And in the synchronous session, we actually talk about and evaluate those reviewer reports to talk about what they did well and how the students would have felt if they had received that feedback from peer reviewers, if they felt it was actionable. If not, how could it be improved? And then the final piece is the discussion session with their group. So everyone assigned to the same submission comes together as a group to discuss their feedback. And based on the reflections I received from students, often the discussion takes the form of, am I being too critical here, or am I not being critical enough? And they kind of work out that balance together. The individual peer review reports are still very distinct and unique. It's not as though there's a group think mentality at all, but it just kind of helps to check in and make sure that everyone's on the same kind of path in terms of providing kind, constructive feedback.
All right, that is fantastic. There's still a couple of extra questions in chat, but we are getting close to the half hour at this point. So I'm just going to re-enter the URL for the eLib journal. So if you have any further questions, please feel free to contact the team. I'm sure they'd love to hear your ideas and feedback. And yeah, I just want to congratulate everyone as well on, just like Philippe is in chat, on just how important this work really is.